Great. So thank you all so much for being here and welcome to our How to Go Solar presentation and to our first event of 2021. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Kate Ayers, and I am Solar Oregon's Community Education Specialist. So today we are going to go over a few agenda items. So we're going to talk a little bit about how solar works. We'll also talk about, is my home right for solar? Um, we'll go over some of the solar incentives, and then we have Jason Love, who is going to give us his solar story. So a little bit first about Solar Oregon. We're a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon, that focuses on education, outreach, community, and advocacy surrounding solar energy and renewable energy. Some of the things we focus on are our How to Go Solar webinars, which you're in right now. We also offer solar tours, including our Go Zero tour and our solar winery tour. We have our Solarize campaigns, which are an awesome way for an entire community to go solar at once. And we also have a really strong passion for peer-to-peer education and the ways that it can bring people into the solar conversation. So one thing that I want to touch on before we get started is that we are a nonprofit, and if you are interested at all in supporting our work, we would love to have you as one of our members. If you are already a member on this call, thank you so much for your support in the work that we're doing. If you'd like to become a member, you can go onto our website to join us. Or if you'd just like to donate to what we're doing, there's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/solar donate for you to send us a donation. Finally, I would really like to thank Energy Trust of Oregon for sponsoring this event and for the work that they do across the state. So just a couple of quick things here. We would love for you to submit any questions that you have that come up throughout this presentation. There is a Q&A button where you can enter any questions, and we do plan on having a Q&A session at the end where we can go through all of your questions. Also, we will be using polling, which I'm actually going to launch a poll right now. This first poll will just ask you where you're tuning in from. So just so you know, all of our polls are anonymous. This is just trying to get a good look at where in Oregon or abroad or in another state you're from. It helps us kind of see who's tuning into these events and better tailor our information that we're giving. Awesome. I'm seeing quite a lot of people submitting. I'll give it just a minute or two in case anybody else would like to fill out this poll. Thank you guys so much. This is awesome to see. Great. So I'm going to end this poll. This is really awesome. Lots of people from Portland, some from the Willamette Valley. We have someone from Central Oregon, and we even have some people from out of state and international. So welcome. Thank you for being here. I also am going to do another poll, as I mentioned. This is completely anonymous, but this is a demographics question. This really helps us kind of get a look at who's attending these events, who we're reaching, and where there may be gaps in our outreach. And so it really is beneficial to have this information so that we can better tailor our presentations going forward. So if you're willing to, we would love to have you submit your answers. This is a longer one, so I'll give a couple minutes for you to fill this one out. And thank you to those who are filling it out. This is really helpful. Great, we're at 70% completed. I'll just give it a minute more. It's great to see there's some variety in the ages of people that are here, which is awesome. Thank you all for joining us today. Great. So I am going to stop this poll. And I have one more to ask you before we move on, which is just going to look at your familiarity with solar. So do you have any understanding of solar? None? Have you spoken to a contractor installer? Or do you already have solar installed, which it looks like we do have a couple people here who have already installed solar, which is really great. We love to see that. Awesome. Great, I'll just give it a couple more seconds here. Most everyone has submitted this. Cool. Thank you all so much for participating in that. So one of the things that we often talk about in these presentations are looking at the benefits of solar that we see. So I have one final poll and then I'm done with polls for the day. But one of the things we talk about is how some of the major benefits of solar are clean renewable energy, lowering utility costs, long-term wealth generation, and energy resilience. So I'm just asking today, what of these things kind of excites you about solar energy? What are some of the things that come to mind when you think about solar energy? And I would like to also mention that you will be receiving a few handouts following this webinar, one of which will touch on some of the benefits of solar. So it'll break down each of these that are listed and kind of some of the reasonings behind why this can be seen as a benefit. So keep an eye out for your mailbox for that. I'm going to give just a couple more seconds. Thank you so much for those who are filling out the poll. It looks like a lot of people are interested and excited about the clean renewable energy aspect and energy resilience, which is awesome. Great. I'm going to end that one and then we are going to move forward. So another piece that will be sent out in a handout for you is one of the questions that arises here in Oregon is whether or not our state is too rainy or cloudy for solar. So I'd love just a little hint, it's not, we still get plenty of sunshine, but that handout will dig into that a little bit more. So now I'm going to transition to looking at how solar works at kind of a very basic level. So here are the system components. The first piece here is that photovoltaic panel or the solar panel, which sunlight hits that panel and produces electricity. Then an inverter or microinverter will convert that electricity and make it usable in the home. Once converted, it will move into the electrical panel. And if you're producing more electricity than you're using, electricity will flow through the utility meter to the grid. When you install your solar panels, you'll also get a bidirectional meter that will measure how much electricity you're using and producing. So when we talk about inverters and microinverters, the inverter is that white box on the left-hand side, pictured, that is usually going to be located next to you or near your electrical panel. A microinverter is going to be that small black box that is going to be underneath each solar panel or every other solar panel. Both of these systems are really great, and the contractor installer that you talk to will be able to talk about which works best for your particular system. So the two main ways to mount your system are a roof mount, which is kind of seen as the most common way, where the panels are installed directly on your roof, or a ground mount, which is a good option if you have extra space or you would like your panels to be a little bit further away from your house. It is important to note, though, that you will need to trench to that area in order to connect your panels to your home system. So that can sometimes add a little bit of an extra cost. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier with your bidirectional meter is that it will measure how much energy you're producing versus how much energy you're consuming, which leads me to net metering, which is basically how much electricity you draw and give to the grid. So we have this depiction here for you, which shows how much solar is produced and consumed in the summer months as well as the winter months. So here in Oregon, your system would be producing more electricity in our summer or sunnier months, which means that you'll be receiving more net metering credits during that time, which you can then use in the winter months when we have rainier and cloudier conditions. And so your system is producing less energy than you're actually consuming. So moving forward to look briefly at some of the identifying features of your home solar potential, one of the things to look at is the system size. So this is how big of a system you're going to need and is usually based on how much electricity your house is consuming. It's important to note that it's not necessarily beneficial to build a system that is larger than your needs for a year. So when we talked about net metering, those credits are only good for a year, an electrical year. So it's not necessarily beneficial to gain a bunch of net metering credits that you then can't use. Another thing to look at is the available space that you have on your roof, as well as your budget. And kind of an average system size that we talk about is about 6 kilowatts. Another important aspect is your solar access. So here in Oregon, we are in the northern hemisphere, and so the sun is always in the southern sky. So south-facing roofs are really ideal for solar here, but east and west facing are still really great options, and your contractor or installer will really be able to help you understand what option is best for your roof location. So roofing materials is another aspect to consider. Both roofing materials are great options for solar. The installation process is just a little bit different for both. So on asphalt, metal flashing will be drilled into your roof rafter to secure your panels. And on standing seam metal, your panels will be attached to those metal seams. Moving forward, another thing to consider is your roof condition and age. So newer roofs are better. This is often because when you go to replace your roof, if it is aging, your contractor will have to come in, take off your solar system, the roof will be replaced, and then that solar system will have to be put back on. It's also really important to note with this that the Energy Trust Incentive requires at least 10 years of roof life. So having a newer roof will help increase your ability to get that incentive also. Another piece to just be aware of is that the roof structure underneath your roof can change how your system is installed, but your contractor or installer can look at that and identify what needs to happen there. So the next piece that I'd like to touch on are the solar incentives that are offered in the area. So since solar has really started, we've seen a drop in the national solar price. A lot of this has to do with the federal incentive, which is that federal investment tax credit. The other incentives that are available here are the solar plus storage rebate and the energy trust incentives. So the ITC was just extended last month at 26%, which is awesome. The one thing to note with that is that you do need tax liability to take advantage of that incentive. The Oregon Solar Plus Storage rebate, the funding for that really comes in waves, so it's important to check with your installer to see if there is availability for that. And the Energy Trust incentive is based on your system size. It is up to $2.8 thousand. You must have PGE or Pacific Power to get that incentive, and you have to use an Energy Trust trade ally to get that that incentive also. So one of the other things that I'd like to mention is the Energy Trust Program Solar Within Reach. It is an income qualifying incentive for up to $9,000. You can find more info through Energy Trust or your contractor, but for a family of 4, that income threshold is just over $77,000. So one thing that I am going to touch on really briefly is a sample budget for what your system might look like. One thing to note here is that it's really difficult to give an accurate budget that touches on everyone. These really vary depending on how big of a system you're looking at, your roof type, the incentives you qualify for. So this is not necessarily representative of what you'll receive. And just kind of an example of what a 6 kilowatt system could look like. So both of these start at about a $20,000 project cost. On the left hand column, or that middle column, as you see it, we have just a residential rebate for that 6 kilowatt. On the right hand column is the low or moderate income rebate and how that works out. So with that Energy Trust incentive for that residential rebate, your net cost would drop down to a little over $18,000. Low to moderate, it could be as low as $11,000. And then depending on that Oregon Solar Plus Storage rebate, it could drop it down even further depending on what that funding looks like. And then once we look at that 26% federal tax credit, your final cost would be about $13,000, or for low to moderate income, it could be just under $4,500. So one of the other pieces that we'll be sending out in a handout, but that I want to touch on here briefly, is just weatherization and efficiency and how that can really be a crucial step when looking at your energy conservation. So conserving energy off the bat can lead to you spending less money on your solar system. But as I said, we'll be sending out a handout with more information on that following this presentation. So when you're ready once you've considered the funding and everything and you're ready to get started, where should you start? So one of the great places that we advise you look towards is Energy Trust's trade allies. These are contractors that are rigorously evaluated, and these are the only contractors that will be able to get you that Energy Trust incentive. So if you're interested in starting that process, you can go to the energytrust.org/solarbid website, and it will send you to a survey that you will fill out that looks like this picture on the right-hand side. You'll then receive multiple installer contacts, and you can then get a few bids from them and kind of look at what the pricing would look like there. So once you've selected your installer and you're ready for the installation process, you'll sign your contract, and your contractor will obtain the permits and apply for that Energy Trust incentive and set up net metering for you. The installation process usually takes about 1 to 2 days, depending on how big your system is. So your contractor will take care of all of the paperwork except for that federal tax credit, which is on you to take care of. And then after installation, your contractor will manage inspections and grid interconnection, and then you'll be all set up and your system will be ready to produce electricity for your home. So now I would love to turn this over to Jason, who is an Oregon resident who recently, over the last couple of years, installed solar and is going to share his solar story with us all. So Jason, take it away.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Hello, thanks for joining us today. Nice to have interest in the community about installing solar in your home or small business. I'll just take a few minutes to tell you sort of what my process was of going through getting a solar system installed on my home, and hopefully answer some questions. And I actually have the the chat open on my monitor as well. So if you have questions that you feel like I could address as I'm sort of going through my story, feel free to throw them in there, and I'll see what I'm comfortable answering. Um, so I have lived in Portland for about 16 years. I have had it in mind for longer than that, that I wanted to have a solar system on my home for environmental reasons and for energy cost reduction reasons, and a number of reasons. But it was only when we moved into the house that we're in now, about 6 years ago, that it made sense from a standpoint of not having trees shading our roof, having a house with a relatively new roof on it, and also having interest in basically having more electricity in our life, because we were also interested in having an electric car. So those things all sort of magically came together. As I said, it was about 5 years ago. It was just a little over 5 years ago that we got after the process of finding what a solar system would cost us and what the process was for getting it installed, and going ahead and proceeding with that. So I guess if I leave you with one thing, it is to say that if you have a good, what's called solar resource, if you have sun on your property, the mechanics of figuring out how much electricity you can make, figuring out what your system will cost, getting an installer to put it in, it's all very straightforward. And Energy Trust of Oregon and Solar Oregon together really sort of partner to streamline that process. So for us, it was, and it tends to come around for my family every year in December as the sort of holidays are ramping up. It seems like we also find ourselves thinking about, like, what are the projects that we wanted to get to this year that maybe we didn't get to, or the projects that we're thinking about sort of wanting to have come next year. The holiday season tends to be that season in my family. So it was about mid-December of 2015 that I basically put together a relatively short sort of set of requirements, thinking about my electrical consumption, our family's electrical consumption, and sent that out to a number of Energy Trust of Oregon contractors, installers. And so essentially that process for me was saying, we're a family of four, taking a look at our utility bill and saying, we consume about this much electricity per month. That adds up to about this much electricity per year. We'd like to reduce that by as much as possible. We have a large roof that gets full sun for several hours a day, and like to understand what it would cost and what it would take to get a solar system installed at my home. And the process really is not too much more complicated than you might imagine, contacting a contractor to change a sink in your house, or, install some electrical outlets in your house, or put in a new window or something like that. It's not structural. It's not particularly complicated from an electrical standpoint. Generally speaking, the whole process is pretty straightforward. And so for us, it was, as I said, sort of putting together sort of the basics of our requirements, sending those out to half a dozen contractors that were recommended by Energy Trust of Oregon, and then getting a bunch of bids back. And those bids came back in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 total. And again, this was 5 years ago for a almost 7 kilowatt solar system. And then again, with Energy Trust of Oregon's help and with our contractors' help, we got to the point where we actually were able to pay about 1/3 of the total retail cost of the solar system. So out of pocket, it cost us about $7,500 for what ultimately was about a $24,500, $25,000 system that we opted for. From the time that I first sent out those bids to the time we tripped the breakers and turned on the solar system was just over a month. The installation itself happened in a half a day. So literally the solar panels and all the equipment, the hardware was delivered to my driveway, much as you might have, a bunch of lumber delivered to your driveway so you can build your raised beds over the weekend. Solar panels delivered into the driveway on a Thursday afternoon, and a crew of 4 or 5 people arrived on Friday morning, and by about 1:30 in the afternoon they were done. And it was just a matter of having an inspector come out, look at the installation, approve it, and switch it on. So it's a pretty seamless process. And I guess one of the things that was really interesting to me after doing this, after thinking about it for years, was kind of how fulfilling it felt, and feeling like I regretted that we waited so long. So in the 5 years that we've had the system, we actually overproduce. The 7 kilowatt system that I installed on my roof, the 24 panels, produce more electricity than we use. So our energy bill for the last 60 months amounts to about $12 a month, and that's just the interconnect cost that we need to pay PGE, our utility, to stay attached to the grid. But we're actually not buying any electricity from PGE. In fact, we give some electricity, which at the end of the year is sort of donated out to the community. So the takeaway from that is just really fulfilling experience to install solar and feel like I'm doing something for the climate and for the community and for the economics of my family. And those 3 things together feel really pretty good. Let's see, I'm going to take a look at we've actually got a chat and a Q&A, but it looks like people are putting stuff into the Q&A. So I'll jump over to the Q&A. Jim asked is the connection 220 or 110 volts? In our case, we had a 220 breaker installed. Did you want to answer that, Pramod? I mean, I'll just answer it verbally. So basically, our panel is our array, our 24 panels, 12 panels. Our array of 24 panels is split into essentially 2 circuits, and each of those circuits is 110, but each of them feed the 2 sides of the panel, and so we're getting 110 times 2 to each side of our panel. So the panels don't actually produce 220, but they feed all the circuits in the house. Is that an adequate answer, Jim? Did you follow that?
Jason, there's another question that you might be able to answer, which is, when did you start experiencing savings given your investment?
So you basically, given that we had our system installed in January of 2016, it didn't actually really start producing, which is to say it wasn't making more energy than we were using until maybe March or April. And so it was at that point that, you know, you're it's it's like drinking rainwater, if you will, right? And if you put a rain catchment system out at a time when it's not raining a lot, then you're still going to be drinking the water from the city for a period of time. But then the rainy season comes, and in the analogy of solar, the rainy season is the summer or the spring. When that sunny season starts, then you start producing more than you're using. And then once we took off on that curve, which again was like 3 or 4 months into having the system, we've stayed ahead ever since. And so, you know, our utility bills that ranged from, you know, $30-40 a month up into, you know, 80, 90, $100 a month, depending on the season, we have stayed ahead of those. We have produced more than that for 60 months, and thus, you know, paid $12 a month rather than whatever we would have paid for the quantity of electricity that we consumed.
Awesome. Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. Jim asked if he could install himself, which that's definitely, it's possible to do an off-grid installation. It's usually a little bit more intensive when it comes to cost. Incentives are usually for on-grid systems, but I have known people who have done their own system builds. Zach also could help answer that question. Zach is our program manager here at Solar
Hi,
Oregon.
everybody. Yeah, great. Thanks, Kate. That's a great question. And I get asked that not too infrequently. I don't see many people in Oregon installing on their own. I have known people to do it in certain places, but what Kate's saying, you need to go through an Energy Trust approved contractor to get the Energy Trust incentive. That's one aspect. It's also the installer will handle all the permitting. They'll make it something where you just sign a contract and you don't have to worry about any of the wiring together of the system, getting on the roof. There's obviously, you know, that's something not for the faint of heart necessarily. So I think that the vast majority of people install with a contractor for very good reason, though that's not to say that some adventurous types don't try it on their own.
Awesome. If there are any other questions coming in. Oh, here's one. Jason, what were your energy costs before your panels?
I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I actually created a spreadsheet that was all of the utility bills that we had accumulated over the couple of years that we lived in this house before we had solar, and then all of our utility bills from our previous house, which weren't a perfect analogy, not a perfect analog, but it sort of informed our energy bill sort of month by month and annualized. But I regret that I don't have that right in front of me, so I'm playing off the top of my head. But as I recall, we worked out to about $600 to $700 a year of electricity costs, and so that, and again, I'm playing from memory, but what I kind of came down to was that our solar system was going to be paid off, which is to say that, you know, the electricity that we generated would have cost us the amount of money that we would have paid in about 10 years. So 10 to 12 years, give or take, and we would break even. And then all the energy that we used thereafter would be sort of free energy, if you will. Just to sort of recap, as I remember, it was about $700 a year, averaged and analyzed and amortized. And given it was about $7,500 that our system ended up costing us after tax credits, Energy Trust of Oregon, I guess those were the only incentives. But between state credits, federal tax credits, and Energy Trust of Oregon paying roughly 2/3 of the cost of the system, the $7,500 that it cost us out of pocket, we determined conservatively it would take us 12 years to pay that off. Optimistically, it would take us about 10 years to pay that off. And then forecasting that the system would last for 20 to 25 years, it ended up feeling like a pretty solid return on investment.
Awesome. So I saw a question here that asked about structural issues on the underside of roof that could undermine installation of solar. I wouldn't say undermine. There can be some differences depending on if your roof structure is trusses versus rafters. If you have rafters under your roof, you may need to just have somebody come in to just add some stability there, some extra support, but both will still support solar and be great options for solar. Another question that was asked is if it's illegal to install solar without a grid tie-in. Definitely not illegal. You can absolutely have off-grid solar, and there are a lot of people who do off-grid solar. It can become more expensive if you are not getting those incentives that specify that you have to be grid tied. But oftentimes, there are a lot of agricultural systems that will use off-grid systems. Another question is how long will the solar system last? Just to clarify, Jason, you said about 20 to 25 years for your system?
Yeah, I dug in on that question pretty deeply with my contractors and just sort of doing research when I was installing my system. And the answer is kind of a nuanced answer. It's an interesting answer in my opinion, but it ultimately comes down to how long do you think it's going to be before you replace your roof? Which is to say that solar panels themselves, they, at least when I bought mine 5 or 6 years ago, they were forecast to remain productive, which is to say they would produce 80% or more of the electricity that they produced when new, and that would be 25 years later. So like there's no moving parts to solar panels. The other equipment is, like a little bit of modification to your breaker box and the inverters. Again, no moving parts. This is all, pieces of electronics. And we're all familiar enough with consumer electronics that, it either fails in the first, month that you've got it, or that it lasts forever, right? Like that calculator that I got when I was in elementary school still works just fine. I have to change the AAA batteries in it occasionally, but otherwise it's just fine. Solar panels and inverters are kind of the same thing. They seemingly last forever. It's just the roof underneath them that you have to think about. And if you're forecasting that your roof is going to last 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, that's probably the period, that's probably the term that you should think about as far as how long your solar system will last. Because if you put a system up and then 20 years later, you have to take it off in order to replace the roof, which is a reasonable scenario. 20 years from now, the technology is going to have advanced so much that I would think you're probably not going to put the same solar panels back up there. You'll probably be able to put a third of the number of solar panels and produce a similar amount of electricity at, you know, half the cost or less because of the way these things evolve. Was that a good answer? Who asked that? Was that Rita that answered that question or asked that?
It was a bio who was actually bio one, but yes.
Bio, oh, and I see. Great answer. Okay, yeah, happy to have provided that.
So we have a question here that says, when you say out of pocket, could that be through a loan or does it need to be paid in cash? I know that a lot of people utilize loans in order to pay for their solar systems because that it can be sometimes a hefty upfront cost. And so loans can be a great option to help pay for that system. There's a question here that says, I understand to install power walls, a solar system would have to receive preemptive tooling. I am going to see if I could defer that question to Zach, our program manager.
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing an answer to another question. I understand to install power walls, solar system would have to receive preemptive tooling. So that's great. So a power wall is a battery, and this is another system you can tie into a solar system, and it allows you to keep the lights on when the grid goes down. Energy resilience is super important, especially in Oregon where we have seismic hazard. And this question is about, I think what I'm hearing is do you need to change the solar system at all in order to add a battery? And maybe I think more likely what you're getting at is if I install solar, will that prevent me from installing a battery as easily later than if I had installed a battery at the same time as solar? So if that's not what you're getting at, you can put in the chat. But the answer is you can add a battery typically to a solar installation that's already installed, and there's no change to a solar system. A solar system, no substantial change. And the way you can think about this is that the solar panels are up on the roof, humming along, happy as ever. The inverter is doing its thing and converting the electricity into a form that can be used in the household. The one thing that may need to change is the routing of some conduit to connect things with wires. And so it's really not a huge issue to add a battery onto a solar system there.
Great, thank you, Zach. There's a question here that says, do most installers install on rentals and commercial structures? If the person who owns the rental is interested in installation, then absolutely. And usually a lot of installers will install on both housing and commercial structures. That's something you can talk to some contractors about. There is a question here that says, does every solar system without a battery shut down automatically when the grid goes down? So if it is grid tied and doesn't have a battery set up, then yes, when the grid goes down, then your system would then also go down. Sorry. There is a question here that Rita asked, can solar installers access the latest in solar shingles and power walls from companies other than Tesla? That's a great question, Rita. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I know there are some examples of people installing the Tesla solar shingles on aside from solar shingles, I'm not entirely sure, but when it comes to batteries, there are other options outside of the Tesla Powerwall that can be used, and that installers do utilize. Um, yes, that
I
exact.
can just add on a sentence or two there. The Tesla solar shingles are essentially, instead of putting panels on top of your shingles, you'll just, when you replace your roof, put shingles that are solar panels on there. And it is new in Oregon, but it's going to grow rapidly. It's just entered the Oregon market. We actually put a great solar story of the third person in Oregon to get solar shingles. You can read about it in the chat there if you find the link. And there are other companies who make solar shingles. There are, for example, a couple of Chinese companies, but they haven't entered the US market, and I'm not sure if they're available as available as Tesla products right now.
Thanks, Zach. Jeff has a question that says, are there any solar technologies on the brink of commercialization that dramatically increase efficiency from the currently best available? That's a great question, Jeff. I am not entirely sure of that. I might ask Zach. Nothing that I've seen, but he also keeps really great track of what's happening in solar.
Yeah, there are a lot of mythologized technologies in solar, some of which may become products eventually. For example, solar roadways was one where people wanted to make roads into solar energy power plants. There's no technology that is a clear on the cusp of being available in the market. And I would not expect a breakthrough like that to occur in terms of the overall modality of technology in less than, a 10-year kind of development cycle. But there are really consistent efficiencies gained in the existing technology, which is silicon wafer.
I think Jeff's looking for something to invest in. Yeah, I think it bears mention. I'm just going to take a moment to sort of go back to the lesson that I learned when we installed solar, and like so many things, and particularly in the technology world, right? Like you can wait and you can wait and you can wait and you can wait, because 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, there's always going to be something that's better than what's currently available in the market, and it's promised. And my kids are forever begging for the fastest processor for their computer, or the fastest GPU for their video boards. And like, you can wait and wait and wait, and you'll spend your life waiting. There comes a point, and I think that we are at the point where the technology is good enough, the price is low enough, that if it is accessible to you, stop waiting. Get in there, reap the rewards that are available now, and it'll continue to improve, and then reap the benefits of the improvements when you move to your next home, or you do have to re-roof in 20 years or 25 years or whatever. But we're there now. Like the technology is advanced enough, it's stable enough, it's set it and forget it kind of technology. You don't think about it at all, except when you don't pay any money to your utility, that it's really rewarding, and it's time to do it.
Thanks for that, Jason. There's a question here from Jeff that asks, is overproduction of the system due to oversizing tax deductible, since those kilowatt hours go to a low income assistance program? That's a great question.
Yeah, I will say, Jeff, in the case of my system, so I live in Portland and I'm a PGE customer. Our utility specifically, and as I understand it, the tax incentives and the utilities in general don't want you to overproduce, right? Like the utilities don't want competition from individuals who are making more electricity, because the utilities are the one that sell you electricity and are regulated for that. So the answer to your question is no, we don't get any tax breaks or tax incentives or tax benefits from overproducing. It is a contribution to the community, and that's kind of how you have to look at it. And so there is the incentive to size your system right, is that if you oversize it, you're buying more than you need. So do some research and some sort of looking inward to understand and forecast what you expect your energy consumption is and will be in the years to come, and size your system appropriately.
Great. There's a question here from Dennis that says, what maintenance is needed for solar cells in Portland? Cleaning them to maintain production, etc., removing moss, keeping squirrels from destroying them?
I guess I'll answer that. We haven't done any maintenance whatsoever in the 5 years that we've had our system. I have a lot of good friends in California that have solar systems, and they make it a habit to get up on the roof once a year and wash those systems, wash the panels. But in Portland, we get plenty of rain on an annual basis that ours get washed, get cleaned, don't accumulate dust. Maybe we accumulated a little, smoke residue over this past summer. But we haven't done anything. And I have an app on my phone that shows me how much power is being produced by each panel on my roof on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis. And, the fluctuation in production is, the variance is so minimal that I have no concerns that dirt is accumulating or squirrels are nibbling wires and causing panels to stop working.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other homeowners in the Portland area too, that they don't really do a lot and still see great benefits. Rita asked, and I might turn this question toward Zach if he has any input. What's your take on high efficiency graphene solar panels? Are installers flexible enough to satisfy homeowner requests for latest solar panel tech?
So about graphene solar panels, I actually don't know a whole lot. My understanding is that is what I would classify as a type of technology that's promising, maybe on the spectrum of mythologized, maybe on the spectrum of it's actually going to be here, but it might be 5 or 10 years. So I'm not the best source of information about graphene solar panels, unfortunately, and certainly cannot give any investment suggestions. In terms of installers' flexibility to install different types of panels, there are installers who have their chosen course that they work with one product. There are installers that work with any product that's commercially available. And so that's just a conversation you can have with your installer. And if it's commercially available and within your budget, you can certainly get it installed in Oregon.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Another question from Jeff. He asks, do most finance companies require a homeowner's insurance addendum for the solar system so they can recuperate their costs if the system is destroyed? It's a great question. I personally am unsure of the answer to that one.
Yeah, so I know that insurance, I would say it's common practice to add your solar system as an addendum onto your home policy. Whether or not a financing institution would require that to give you a solar loan, I can't speak to that, unfortunately.
I don't know why you wouldn't add it to your homeowner's insurance as an addendum. We did, and it was literally a phone call to the insurance company to say, "Hey, we just added, you know, $25,000 solar system to our roof, and I I don't. If it impacted the cost of our homeowner's insurance, it was so negligible that I don't even remember it. Meaning, like I think it was ones or tens of dollars per year. Uh, so it's not it's not an issue to add that to your insurance. Shouldn't be a concern.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And then there's one question left from Jeff, who asks, what is a good answer to a homeowner who says the chemicals and rare elements used in panel production make their use not worth the trouble? Zach, you unmuted. You're interested.
Yeah, I am interested, and I'm happy to take this. Feel free to jump in too if you want. But yeah, this is a really good question, a question that's asked a lot for a really good reason. And there is, it's one that I think merits its own webinar, really. And the bottom line is that there is a range in terms of how manufacturers manufacture panels, and in fact there is a great tool called the Solar Scorecard that rates solar manufacturers based on their environmental and social practices. And I believe it's a biennial report, and I believe the last one was in 2018. So uh, it, unless they've come out with one more recently. But um, in general, you can produce a solar panel without the use of a whole lot of, uh, you know, rare earth materials or like lead. You can like limit the amount of lead. You can be more friendly. Of course, it is an electrical device, and it will use some of those materials. So the overall, the way I would frame it and think of it is, what is the overall cost of an alternative energy to solar, which is our conventional oil, coal, natural gas, and it's really hard. I would say it involves a lot of thinking to fill that picture out and answer it properly. But I think that the benefit of solar, of decarbonization, and of removing the negative health impacts of pollution from burning fossil fuels, and other, like respiratory and other health effects, vastly outweighs any kind of negatives that solar has. Not to say that you shouldn't consider them. Really hard to answer more definitively than that in a short bit, but that is something that Solar Oregon is producing educational content on, in partnership with OSEA. And we're hoping to make something available for a general audience that kind of dives into that question this year. So that's a great question.
To piggyback off of that question, there are two people who have asked about what happens to the panels at the end of their life cycle and how they are recycled or gotten.
Yeah, so it depends. In the United States, it depends a little bit on where you are and what actions you take as a consumer at the end of the life cycle. But there is our main recycling utility here in the Portland metro area, at least, does recycle solar panels as a service. And solar panel recycling is very much established in some places, very robustly in Europe, and I'd say it's growing in the United States. There's a growing policy conversation to make it required. It's not required right now, and I think it's really good to think about what happens at the end of any electronic device's life cycle. Know that if you are a solar consumer right now, it is in your hands to make that choice.
Great. And I'm seeing one final question that is submitted by Jeff, who says, my understanding is that the solar system cannot be property taxed, but it should increase the home's value due to recent efforts to appraise its value accurately. Is that true?
Yes, let me just read that again to make sure that I have it fully in mind. Yes, so in Oregon, you, I believe this is state taxes, you are not required to pay taxes on the value of the solar system as a benefit that I believe is written into code. Statute, and but your home does increase in value. In terms of how it's appraised, you may have to find an appraiser or be connected with an appraiser who knows how to value solar. But their empirical studies show that solar does increase a home's property value, and for really good reason. You can show people who are moving into the home, look at all the energy you don't have to pay for. It's a pretty easy sell.
Great. We are 3 minutes after 5 now, so being conscious of time. If there are any final questions, please put them in the Q&A. But I just would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Jason, for being a part of this presentation and sharing your story with us and answering questions. Please look out for an email from us that will have a recording of this and some handouts for you for more information. But thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kate.
Bye.